Well, good morning, all. My name is Dr. Chris Simpson. I'm a professor of counseling here at A&M Commerce. My co-moderator this morning is Ms. Sherry Harwell. I am honored and I'll go ahead and say blessed to serve as the moderator for this breakout session. I welcome each of you who are participating today to the What Truth Sounds Like Symposium, sponsored by Texas A&M Commerce, College of Education, and Human Services. Dr. Lands, Professor Glover, and Reverend DeSasta are speakers today. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, expertise in the area of faith-based community, systemic racism, and potential actions that can be taken moving forward. Everyone, I just want to alert you to sort of keep the session moving in a timely fashion. We've allocated 20 minutes for each of our speakers. There will be a little bit of an alteration to that, and that Professor Glover, when he speaks, he has some statements for about 5 minutes, and then he wants to open it up for any kinds of chat questions that anyone may have at that point. And then he has to depart to another conference this morning. But for Dr. Lands and for Reverend DeSasta, they will have agreed to answer any kind of chat questions we have at the end of our presenters' time. There will be approximately 15 minutes to get in those chat questions, and they will funnel those through Sherry and myself to ask our presenters. So we have about roughly now 60 minutes, maybe a little bit less than that, with Professor Glover having to leave a little bit early. 20 minutes per speaker. And then 15 minutes at the end for any kinds of questions. I now am excited to introduce our three speakers. I will briefly introduce each one of those folks, and then I will then ask Professor Glover to start with his remarks, and then move to Dr. Lands, and then to Reverend DeSasta. Excuse me. Okay, so I will, excuse me for one moment. So I'm just moving something around there, pardon me. A graduate of SMU Perkins School of Theology and Grambling State University, Professor Clarence Glover is the founding pastor of First African Freedom Church in Dallas, Texas, and Bonwire, Ghana, West Africa. Presently, Professor Glover is president of Sankofa Education Services. Professor Glover's legacy in nonviolent civil rights activism spans more than 40 years. While chairman of the Dallas NAACP Police Community Relations Committee, Professor Glover was responsible for changing the Dallas Police Department's deadly force policy from, excuse me, property over life to life over property. In 1987, together with Ms. Rosa Parks and others, he testified before a congressional hearing convened by Congressman John Conyers on police abuse in the African-American community. Professor Glover has served as director of Southern Methodist University's Department of Multicultural Student Affairs, adjunct professor of African-American Studies at SMU, organizer of the SMU Anti-Apartheid Movement, special assistant to the general superintendent of DISD, where Professor Glover conducted Reaching to Teach in a Multicultural World, an orientation seminar for all first-year teachers. Professor Glover is the consultant and interviewer of the PBS documentary, The First Federal Holiday in 1986, named in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Archbishop Dr. Sterling Lands II is author of the books The Main Ingredient and Inside Out. Dr. Lands is an international consultant and educator with a primary focus on developing and maintaining families of high integrity and strengthening children's character, self-worth, and achievement. He's a dynamic speaker spanning many fields from engineering to faith groups. He has presented keynote addresses and conducted workshops in the US, South Africa, Trinidad, St. Vincent, Canada, Germany, and West Africa. He earned his undergraduate degree in engineering from Southern University and a master's from the International School of Divinity. Dr. Lands is the president of the ANAK Consultants and serves as senior pastor at the Greater Calvert Bible Church in Austin, Texas, He also serves as the presiding bishop of the Family Life International Fellowship and presiding prelate of the Archdiocese of St. John the Baptist Evangelical Episcopal Community, USA. He and his wife, Mabel, were married in 1967. They have 2 sons and 10 grandchildren. His new book, Better Choices, is available now from Author House at www.authorhouse.com. The Reverend Amos DeSasa is the senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Dallas. As a child, Amos immigrated from Ethiopia to South Carolina, eventually serving as a co-pastor to aid in the launch of Downtown Church, a new Presbyterian USA congregation in Columbia, South Carolina. Amos's history in social justice ministry includes work with street children in Brazil through Hope Unlimited, and service at various homeless assistance organizations in South Carolina, including Foot Care Ministry, the Lightway Coalition, and Transitions. Amos met his wife, Sarah, while earning his Bachelor of Arts at Presbyterian College. Later, he obtained his Master's of Divinity from Wake Forest University's School of Divinity. Together, they have 2 children, Abraham and Shepherd. Thank you all so much, our distinguished speakers, for being here. I will now defer to Professor Glover. You have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simpson, and good morning to all of you, and to my panelists, colleagues, I greet you as well. It's an honor to be with Texas A&M today, and particularly during this time of our nation's history. And I'd like to begin to open up my brief remarks by saying that I am a Jim Crow survivor. I share that with you because there are those of us who lived prior to 1964 who experienced legal segregation in this country. The COVID virus has prohibited many of us, of my generation, to get involved in the present issues of today. But I think it is critical that we who are Jim Crow survivors, both Black and white, find ways and avenues to speak the truth during this time so that this generation might understand the history of this nation from those of us who lived during these times. I had an opportunity to work with Dr. Abernathy, Congressman John Lewis, Dr. C.T. Vivian, Mrs. Rosa Parks, and others who shared with me many of their visions. They worked with Dr. King. I'm also a descendant of, I'm a 7th generation farmer from Northwest Louisiana, cotton picker, one who lives and believes in returning to the land. I say all of this because as we begin to talk about healing and faith, I believe it's important to place it in context. I'd like to use as a topic, subject, if you will, being a pastor as well as professor, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, saving the white church. I'd like to put it as a context because as we begin to talk about faith, and particularly we can speak of an ecumenical community, of course, the Muslim community, other communities of faith. But I would like to focus specifically upon the white church this morning. I believe that it is critical that we, as particularly African Americans, people of African descent, began to turn the conversation in a way that we deal not only with effects of racism, but causes of racism. We understand, first of all, that race is not a scientific fact, that it is a social misnomer that we are not different races, but only one race in many cultures. But it is the illusion of races that has brought us to this point today. So that if we begin to understand that we are one human family, then our language is liberated from discussing issues of racial equity to issues of human equity. Because when we speak of race, I submit to you that we are maintaining a dysfunctional language pattern, if you will, and we would never get out of this particular problem. I believe it, as I taught at SMU, I would say to my students that unless we ask the right questions, we would never find the right answers. So I hope today that I can frame for you some questions and issues that might lead us toward finding some correct answers. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. This is a song within the church that is, I consider, the anthem of the church. We hear it everywhere for ceremonies, for rituals, particularly in the European American community. I find it quite interesting that this song is used over and over again. And we in the African American church, we also sing it as well, but not as often in terms of public ritual. And when I mean public rituals, places of remembrance, I heard it just the other day at 9/11. A young African American woman, she sang it very beautifully in a tradition of the African American church. But very few people know that Amazing Grace was written certainly by John Newton. What you will find in many old hymn books, particularly in the Gospel Pearl, which is a Baptist hymn, is that you will see the name John Newton, but not who's the writer, composer, but not the arranger of the song. There's never any denotation of that. In my research, I found that the song was written by John Newton, he who was a slaver, a British slaver going back and forth to England and to America. While on the ship one evening, there was a great storm, is said that, and he heard a sound coming from the hull of the ship. Mm-hmm. 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 And it said that he took this pen and wrote the words, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." What was the sound? Where did it come from? I suggest to you that the sound that John Newton heard was the sound of enchained African men and women being brought to America. It has been said that this sound represents an African mantra, a moan. But it was this song with the words, "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," that John Newton found it was converted and went back with Wilberforce in England and started the anti-slavery movement. I believe today that if the white church involves itself with this principle of amazing grace, how sweet the sound, we might begin to unravel some of the tenets of racism, because it is the church, white church, that justified the systems of racism in America and in England for many years. And so we must begin as African Americans and brothers and sisters to work in a way with our white brothers and sisters and work through the issues of racism, systemic structures that impact our society. And it would not be overnight, it would take years, I believe, but we must place it in this context. So it is with that, I open with these remarks. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, saving the white church. If there are questions and engagements, I would welcome at this time.
Thank you very much, Professor Glover. Just one moment while I am searching here. Professor Glover, I would, just a kind of a general question, if we may. You were saying how the changes to the white church. Do you have in mind specifically some very tangible changes that can occur that would be, certainly the word easy is inappropriate, but would be reachable?
Certainly. I believe the first thing and the most radical thing, I think, is the removal of any images in churches. I grew up, of course, it's like many of us as African Americans and others, with an image of Jesus, who is said to be God in the flesh. And I believe that this is a great deterrent to our understanding of spirituality, our deeper understanding of spirituality, just as we see it in the feminist movement, where we see the ideal of male, if you will, and we understand the spiritual nature of God being both male and female in the images which we were created. So that I think the removal of images first, or the white image, will begin to be the first step, because it limits our understanding of the spirituality of God, and it affirms the superiority of whiteness.
Very good. Thank you very much. And it, also you're seeing, excuse me one second while I'm sorry, I'm just pulling up, I'm looking things up. I'm trying to look at the chat here as we're speaking. Bear with me one moment. So Dr. Glover, or pardon me, Professor Glover, you're talking about removing white images. I would assume you would, just to elaborate a little bit further, you would mean like white images of Christ in the church.
That's correct. That's
as as likely Christ was not white.
No, but not to replace them with a black image. Images, they interfere with our deep understanding. If we do get into historical context, we can look at the historical geography of the Bible, and know that people of color were primary in Scripture. And I think that this is the second phase for us to understand that people of color played a primary role in the development of the faith community, as well as the human family, as we know now that all humans are descendants of what we call the continent of Africa, and that we are actually 50th descendants, cousins, as you might say. But yes, to remove the white, but not to replace a black image of Jesus and to denote it as a God image, but rather to begin to focus on spiritual images, as Scripture, as he says, God is a spirit, and they who worship God must worship God in spirit and in truth.
Could you give us an example? You said not necessarily replacing that image with Jesus being maybe black, but can you give us an example of how we might replace those images?
You need not replace them. There's no need to replace an image. The focus, again, the teachings of the Messiah in our congregation with Yeshua, the Messiah, Jesus the Christ, is to worship God in spirit and in truth. And I believe as we talk today about healing in terms of human development, I believe it's so important that in the issue of racism, that we understand how this image, how the church played a role in justifying the dehumanization of people of color, be it with the Hamitic Code theory, Noah's curse, be it with Dr. King stated, the major premise, minor premise, and the conclusion, as we all know, God made man. As you know, God is not a Negro, therefore the Negro is not a man. And so we see all of these elements within the context of theological discourse justifying the dehumanization of African people. And so if we are able to unravel this, then we're able to begin to look at humanity as all God-centered, if you are all humans, as being fine, because the only way racism exists is that it existed is, in slavery particularly, is that we were not seen as human. So we must claim and affirm the humanity and understand that white supremacy is not an actual, they're different forms because there are different levels of white supremacy, both in overt forms as well as political, economics, and in religious forms as well.
Thank you, sir. And one final question, if we may. What role do you see the social gospel playing during these turbulent and difficult times?
It's very important. Dr. King and those of us who are followers of the movement embrace the social gospel, that it goes beyond the pulpit, and that we must understand that not only do we engage in protest, but we must engage in process. We must understand that the social gospel is the very heart of what the Messiah preached, coming out of Isaiah 61 and Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he's anointed me to preach the gospel, proclaim liberty to the captives, give sight to the blind, and proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. All of this is the central form. Dr. King, this was his basic foundation for the social gospel. So the church must see itself, and the faith communities we must see ourselves as a part of speaking, being the moral voice, the spiritual voice, particularly during these times. And as I said, having gone there myself and with limited access to the movement, as we see it today, but I work with many of the young men and women, they must have a moral voice. During the movement, we went from what I call prayer to protest to prayer. We started our protest with prayer, we protested, then we returned to prayer. And we also made sure that our means justified the ends, as Dr. King taught us, that if we're going to have just ends, we must have just means. So this is what we deal with in terms of nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. And it is the heart of the social movement, as well as love, as Dr. King taught us, and as the Messiah, agape love. So that we must have a love ethic, love the injustice, while we must be able to love our brothers and sisters who may perpetrate those things against us. And remember, as our ancestors taught us in our prayer, teach us to love our enemies and pray for those who despitefully use us.
Professor Glover, thank you so much for your time today. I know you need to go to another conference. We appreciate your words and answering some of the questions from the chat. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much, and I wish you all well.
Thank you for coming.
God bless.
Dr. Lands, I now turn the time over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I was encouraged by my brother, Professor Glover. I too am a Jim Crow survivor, and worked very closely with a number of people that I heard him mention. Matter of fact, it was Dr. Vivian who got me recalibrated once. He and Kelly Miller Smith were having a meeting in St. Louis, and he said to me, he says, Lance, our primary charge is to save the white church. It took me back some because it didn't make sense to me initially, in that many of the strongest racists were part of the white church, particularly in the part of the country that I lived in, and I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Klan headquarters is only about 28 miles from where I lived up in Hammond. So it wasn't as if it made sense to me at the time. But as I get closer and closer with guys like Bernard Lafayette and Jim Bevel and Carter and Mrs. King, it dawned on me that no matter how much we attempted to push ourselves forward, you couldn't do that in and on your own strength, and God was not going to enter into your violence. So it took me back to realizing, and I was glad to hear the statement about Dr. King's mantra, because it was basically the Sermon on the Mount that Dr. King preached and taught. And so no matter where he was, this is, if you went back to the basic elements, that's what it was, Sermon on the Mount. So with that being said, I am sure that, and I guess I agree with D'Angelo, I believe that white supremacy is a social, political, economic system of domination that's based on racial categories that benefits those defined and perceived as white. Now, we know that whiteness is not an anatomical or biological construct. It's a sociological construct that was put in place in order to justify the treatment of people who are non-white as also being non-human. So when we talk about the role of the church and how we should operate in, I read the statement about the most segregated hour of the year or the week is at 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock services on Sunday morning. I happen not to have a problem with that. After pastoring for over almost 50 years now, I'm very clear that people should go where they are comfortable, but not be prevented from going somewhere because of the color of their skin. But I don't see anything magic about sitting next to a person white or sitting next to a person black. I think that it should be about the content of our character, and we should operate as children of God, as opposed to black, white, brown, red, or yellow. I was in Restorative, Ghana, which is about I guess 35, 40 miles from Accra. And we got there very late, and when we got there, the church was in an uproar. It was just a great, great service. But when I walked in, I noticed that plastered around the wall, I'm talking about totally around the wall, you had these large pictures of this European that was called Jesus. and it must have been about 25 pictures. So the wall was covered around its entirety. And the people were just praising, and they were going into almost hysterical rants. And it dawned on me that this was a religious spirit, but it was not of God, because the person they were praising was represented by that image, and that image had been placed by programming into their mind as being who God was, but that's not who God was, and that's not who he is. So it took us a while. I had my team with me, a couple of bishops and one of my ministers of music, and we worked through that thing, trying our best to bring about a type of freedom. But when I returned to the US, I find the same thing. I go into places and they have the Lord's Supper picture up there, and they don't even have a black busboy. I mean, there's nobody on the picture that looks like anyone other than European pictures. Well, you don't get upset with the church for that, because if they knew better, they probably would do better. What bothers me is that we perpetuate that lie through the images that we teach. I was talking with Reverend Jackson some years back. We were in a movement in St. Louis with 7-Up, and he made the statement, and it was really a passing statement. He says that if you can get a person caught up on the images, then you don't have to worry about any other programming, because you tend to idolize those things which are placed in your purview as being right or better. In the church, we must take the steps to decommission that white image. We must take steps to dismantle the lies that have been associated with Eurocentric religion, and instead look to, and there's nothing wrong with Rome, so I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I think we should also include Alexandria, and we should also include Carthage, so that we can see that maybe those who are unenlightened will come to appreciate that the whole concept of religion wasn't brought to Africa. It actually was birthed in Africa, particularly in North Africa. Now, if we ever can get to that point, then we now have a common ground that black, white, brown, red, we really can't call ourselves separate, and there was never anything such as separate and equal, but we can't be separated by anything other than the enemy's attempt to one, destroy the family, which was God's first institution on the planet Earth, and it was the enemy's first target for attack. So we want to destroy that. And two, by destroying the family, cause more and more of our young people to stay on this prison to pipeline, this pipeline to prison course that they're on, and then keep the men locked up or being shot in the street, and keep the women caught into a downward spiral of continuing to be the masses concubine. So the church, I believe, is being challenged today more than ever to raise up the standard, get a standard that God will honor. And I believe that he gives us that standard in Micah 6:8. I think that we're told how we should operate. We know what's required. We don't do it, but it's not because we don't know. And so knowing it and doing it are not the same thing. I believe that your behavior follows your belief system. So if my belief system determines my behavior, maybe we would, and this is in my new book coming out, maybe we should stop focusing on behavior as much and instead start dealing with belief systems. And I'll give you an example of what Paul said to the church of Corinth and to the church of Rome, actually, where he made it in clear terms. He said, look, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what is that good and perfect and acceptable will of God. Well, the reality is that when you say be not conformed to the world, it is don't be conformed to your old program. Get away from just automatically responding and reacting to your old program, but instead be transformed by the renewing of the mind. The mind is where the battlefield is. If we can get that mind renewed, then we can receive each other on the basis that we are all children of God. So I'm open for any conversation later on after Pastor DeSauce speaks, but I just want you to know that I'm committed to this thing and to the end. Now, my end may be closer than most of you, but I do believe that we have a lot to give, and I think that we're not giving it because the doors are not being opened as rapidly. And so we must do more pushing to ensure that truth is elevated. Why truth elevated? Because Jesus said, "You shall know the truth." Gnosis, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So freedom has to be seen as much more. One of the things that Jim Bevel used to tell me all the time when we were campaigning in U City outside of St. Louis, he said that, Lance, he says, our focus, you have the focus right in salvation, and you're also focused right in education. He says, but when you talk about liberation, what are you saying? So we went on to have a conversation, and he has a unique style of engaging you. Finally, he said, look, here's the deal. He says, if we don't work toward economic liberation, where our people are no longer dependent on the plantation for substance, we will never leave the plantation, period. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lands. And we will have no doubt some questions here later. Reverend DeSasa.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you all today. And I am I'm here in Dallas at First Presbyterian Church of Dallas. I've got the unique perspective of being a Black pastor in a predominantly white congregation in a denomination, the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church USA, that is predominantly white as well. Also new to Dallas, just moved here a year and a half ago. So I do have a little presentation to share with you, some slides. So I'll try to get through these as quickly as possible. So I want to begin with a date, May 25th. This was when the catharsis really began for the church that I serve and other churches like it. This is a tall steeple mainline church here in downtown Dallas. We are just blocks away from Dallas Morning News and blocks away from the border that separates South Dallas from the rest of Dallas. And we're blocks away from City Hall as well. So we're down here in the thick of it. My preliminary findings of this little exegetical work that I have been doing here for the last 5 months or so is that the church was not just this church, but especially tall steeple mainline churches. We were unprepared really for the catharsis that was May 25th. And we were unprepared for a variety of reasons, but I've got three that I want to just hypotheses that I want to share with you. One is that we were a distracted church. The distracted church was the mode that we were in. We all watched George Floyd die under the weight of an institution on May 25th. And I'm also speaking from the perspective of somebody that is an institutionalist, so I want to acknowledge that. My pension is with the Presbyterian Church USA. My retirement benefits are with the Presbyterian Church USA. I was brought up in the PCUSA. So I've been a part of this institution for my entire life. And it looks like will be for a while longer. So watching George Floyd die under the weight of an institution, that's when the catharsis began. But then we watched Amy Cooper attempt to leverage her whiteness in Central Park in New York to compel the same institution that was on top of George Floyd to subdue Christian Cooper, a Black man who was just watching birds. So all of a sudden on May 25th, it appeared that white people with or without a badge thought that they could colonize a Black body with impunity. And this was news to a lot of people. So immediately at that moment, it was apparent that our traditional approach to eradicating injustice would not be enough. And again, speaking as an institutionalist from inside an institution that professes to support social justice movements. My church, the church I serve, has got a burgeoning large ministry to our people who are at risk for homelessness and for people who are experiencing homelessness as well. But May 25th was different. It was like it was obvious that that we had misidentified the root of racist behavior, and the evil of racist ideologies was all of a sudden to us apparent to be in the groundwater and the systems that silently absorbed the guilt of racism towards blacks. It just made racism disappear. And sitting within an institution as a leader here, and then also our congregation here, you could sense it, that we were all of a sudden aware of our own complicitness in what we were seeing on the 25th. So it was as if our attempts to promote, a let's get along spirit of inclusivity and welcome exempted institutions from scrutiny. We thought that didn't apply to us, because we've all been trying to get along. And then all of a sudden we realized that racism kills people. And it does it by dehumanizing them first. And it was like the church just finally figured it out on May 25th. This is Austin Channing Brown here, so you can read it for yourself, but her book, I'm Still Here, is one I would certainly recommend to anybody. So, here we are, and we, let me get my view right here. The question is, why were we the last ones to know? Why was the mainline tall steeple churches like the last ones to really know? Well, religious participation here in the United States has been on a steady decline for years. This is not news to anyone. This is from Pew Research Center. These surveys were taken directly from them. So the decline has been stark, and you got to ask your question, why are people not attending church anymore? Well, I don't think it's that they're any less spiritual. I think that the hypocrisy and the exclusion, the nativism and the empire building that the church has been up to for some time has delegitimized the church for younger people. My own denomination, the PCUSA, declined in size from 4.25 million members to 2 million since 1965. So we peaked in 1965. And the institution of the church has been in a defensive posture, really since the cultural revolutions of the 60s and 70s. We have found it difficult to be open to Reformation and rooted in our own religious rituals at the same time. I don't think it's a coincidence that we peaked in size at the same time that the authority of institutions everywhere was diminished because of our tendency towards self-interest and intolerance. All of that was being scrutinized and being called out, and we did not have an adequate response. Our response instead, which was to crouch down and wait for it all to pass. So this is Gardner Taylor, God rest his soul, preeminent voice from the pulpit in this country and in the American church. So Taylor says, I think the church today in America partakes of the contemporary American disease of let me alone. I want to get along. I don't want to be bothered with too many things. And I think that's in the churches, he says. When a pulpit becomes an echo of the pew, it loses, I think, almost all of its reasons for existence. I return to this quote often in my own preparations for church. This is we had the distracted church earlier. I mean, and now this is the comfortable church. This is another mode that we have been in. What's happened is that the church in duress after the cultural movements of the 60s, it sought stability and comfort, was afraid to lose more members. Again, speaking from my perspective in a tall steeple mainline church that is predominantly white. We were afraid to lose more members. We decided, I think, that the safety from the threat of extinction was to be found in our moderation. If we were just moderate and temperate in what we said and did, then maybe fewer people would leave. And so instead of resisting this oppressive winner-take-all theology of corporatism, we embraced it. So we began to mimic, corporate America in the ways that we acted, decisions we made. And now churches are either huge or they're tiny. And tiny churches are trying to keep the doors open. Huge churches are trying to get huger. And the most alarming trend in all of this is the hollowing out of the middle, the disappearance of the neighborhood parish. Huge churches, by definition, are all delocalized. The problems that are on the streets around them have no effect on their bottom line, which their bottom line is, number of members, number of giving units, weekly contribution per giving unit. It's really hard to fight for someone else's survival when you're obsessed with your own. And I think leaders in churches have found it hard to balance the corporatism of church with the mission of Jesus. They've either found it hard or we've just refused to actually follow Jesus. And young people, going back to the slide I just showed, young people have noticed that we won't do anything that threatens our survival. And in response to that, they have opted out. So this is what the church looks like now. This is the latest Pew report on the state of American religion. As you can see up here, silent generation, those born from 28 to 45, are still identifying as Christian. At that point in that class, there's only 10%. You move down here to the millennials, and this is the alarming trend for us in churches, is that younger people just aren't coming. They're not coming. So this is evidence to me of what another mode that we've been in, which is the graying church. We've been getting older. And so where has the mainline traditional church been, the tall steeple mainline church? Well, where has it been in the struggle to eradicate racist ideologies from the systems that determine the life and liberty and freedom of humans in this world? Where have we been? Well, the church has just been growing older. Older adults are less likely to encounter people that may challenge their worldview or their theology or their moral imagination. And same time we've been getting older, we have also been growing whiter. And if you're white and you're an older adult, you are very unlikely to have more than one Black friend. So the issue with this is that it's difficult to encounter people that might challenge your assumptions, might offer a different perspective on the world as it is and as it should be, and may also share the pain and struggle that is being Black in America. Of course, King said, the church has too often been blessed a status quo that needs to be blasted and reassured, a social order that needs to be reformed. And so the church must acknowledge its guilt, its weak and vacillating witness, its all too frequent failure to obey the call to servanthood. Today, the judgment of God is upon the church for its failure to be true to its mission. What have we been doing then if we haven't been true to our mission? This is our third mode, which is just the busy church. We have been busy doing the wrong thing. And here you'll note and see the growth of evangelicalism among Christians. It's much higher than it was a decade ago. So evangelicalism in this case, as we're talking about racist ideologies, the eradication of racial injustice. Evangelicalism is a problem because it posits that we're separated from God by our personal sin, and the nurture of our personal salvation is the highest and best use of our time. So it teaches us that we're separated from God by sin, and the nurture of our salvation is the highest and best use of our time. The focus is on the individual, and there is no space for discussions about systemic racism or the evil of racist ideologies or the prevalence of implicit and explicit bias in housing and education and banking and law enforcement. When you're turned inward and you're gazing at your navel, it's hard to have a perspective on what's happening around you. And again, going back to, the largest churches are typically more evangelical, and also they promote a theology of born againness. And so their growth is, again, measuring their growth in numbers makes it difficult to also promote the corporate welfare and common purpose of people and communities. So what do we do now is the question. So I think we got some movements that we need to make, and we're doing this work here. By the way, I should say that we have embarked on a journey here at this church that I serve that is energizing me. It's not always comfortable, but we're confronting our busyness, our distractedness, our comfort, and we're doing it with real integrity here. So we got to move from racial reconciliation to restorative justice as our primary focus. So we've all as shared with you in that quote from Austin Channing Brown, the reconciliation of people for so long has been our idea of justice work, for us all to forgive each other and get along. Restorative justice is or healing justice or transformative justice is also very much in line with and centered in the ethic of the gospel. And is consistent with our prevalent theologies. So instead of working first to get along with each other and then stopping there, we've got to begin to think about what justice looks like when it serves the purpose of restoring right relationships, restoring lives, restoring the dignity of victims, and restoring the capacity of people to earn money and support their families and themselves. So restorative justice or transformative justice is where we hope to go. The other is to move from absolution to activation. And I think this is really important. Absolution being, it looks like this. White people confess their sins to Black people, who are then put in a position to absolve their confessor or risk a really awkward interaction. So in this moment of absolution, where absolution is expected in this moment, our bodies, Black bodies, have once again been co-opted for the benefit of a white person. I'll just say this, I've never been asked in advance if I want to hear a story about the time when my confessor was racist. It just gets told, and then the expectation is listen to me, and then absolve me, or else it's going to get awkward. So if we can move to activation, in activation, I think about the Apostle Paul's instruction to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. You can't wipe the hard drive here. There's no button you can push and just start over. You got to write over each file with new experiences, the files in our souls and in our spirits. The way to do that is to be in proximity to and in the midst of the struggle. It's this work that we're trying to do is you can't do it from a distance, and it's really not consistent with Jesus's instruction to us to journey together in physical proximity to each other, to share everything. There is you can't be an anti-racist by proxy. It's is impossible. So And then moving from, this emphasis on diversity of people in our faith communities to unanimity of purpose instead. So straight up, we just need to reorient ourselves to the teachings of Jesus, because there's nothing in the gospel or in the Hebrew Bible that would instruct us to be anything but accepting, inclusive, and resistant to oppressive systems. It's just not there. I don't hear Jesus say anything like, well, take care of yourself and hope the best for everybody else. So unanimity of purpose, as instead of diversity of people. What we've been doing with diversity of people is just let's try to make our churches more diverse, our communities of faith more diverse, and then hopefully magically the world will get better. I think it's important that we try to expect and create space that can be diverse, but more important than that is that we have a unanimity of purpose that is impactful, and also works to transform the world that we live in so that it looks more like the kingdom of heaven right here. All right. That's it from me.
Reverend DeSasa, thank you so much for that. We have, yes, I would agree, Dr. Lands. We had some questions from the chat that I would like to throw out to our speakers. So I'll throw these out in no particular order. Bear with, let me, if I can scroll, that will help me. One second. This would be to any of our speakers who would like to address this question. Do you believe that the reason there are so many icebergs in the pews is because there are too many polar bears in the pulpit? I don't know, Dr. Lands or Reverend DeSasa, if either one of you want to take that one.
Dr. Land, my mouth is dry, so I got to go find some water. So.
I believe that, to be honest with you, I don't necessarily know where the polar bears are in the congregations that I'm a part of and the ones that serve in the fellowship. These pastors are everything but polar bears. But I do understand the concept, and that is the pews will always reflect the pulpit over time. So if you have indeed timid, fearful, or self-centered, or cold people in the pews, it is a reflection of the pulpit, whether we ever want to admit it or not.
Good. Another question. The role of church decline, isn't that?
Wait, I want to be sure that this also, I want you to know that I noticed you left me out there by myself.
I did leave you out there hanging. Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go forward. Yeah.
Noted.
Another question from the chat. The role of church decline, isn't that prophetic when the teaching of the Bible that in the last days there will be a great falling away from the church?
Yeah, I don't necessarily associate that decline with the apocalypse, but I'm not out looking for signs for the apocalypse right now, because I don't think we have to look for too many signs. It seems like it does very much feel like an apocalyptic season. You know, the church, even when we say the word church, I don't necessarily know that we're all talking about the same thing. You know, I can only speak from my perspective, but at times it feels like, you know, depending on where you worship, that not all churches are sometimes even reading the same Bible, you know. So do we even have a foundational text upon which, from which we can begin our conversations? And I don't, if there is a next great fissure, you know, in the church and another split, I think it will be around the authority of Scripture and how it should be interpreted. I think that's already happening right now. But I don't know if I answered that question. The decline to me it's from my perspective, from where I sit, has a whole lot to do with relevance and our inability to actually answer the questions that people are asking. We're answering questions that we want to, you know, but so, which is probably a result of our distance, you know, again, thinking about that question of proximity. How close are we to the streets that we, you know, that house the people we serve and the people who need to be served. So,
I certainly agree with you know, Pastor, but I'd like to add maybe another option in the answer, and that is the church today, particularly in the Western hemisphere, and more focused in the U.S. and then bringing it even closer here into Texas, have become, by all reasonable definitions, very apostate. We've become a social entities that provide consumers with entertainment, and we have pulpits who are managed by religious entertainers, and with the objective of keeping everybody feeling good. There are people across the country who are selling that poison, feeling good. You have a right to feel good. You should feel good, and so that may draw people for a while. But what happens is that because there's no substance to it, when we get into the storm, then the house collapsed because you only had sand. So and then the churches that are operating on the foundation of what God says, if you really do some digging, you're going to find out that those churches are not declining. It's just that they're small, and they're more like the Book of Acts churches. So I too read the Pew Researchers and the Bonner Researchers and their data, and I've concluded that their data is taken across the mainstream, as Pastor said, the tall steeples and then the mega churches. Well, that megamania is not a biblical principle. That was never the case. Even when there were thousands mentioned in Acts, it was not about one large church in Jerusalem. It was about many, many, many smaller churches, similar to what was happening in Korea just a few years ago. So I believe that part of the fall away is not really a fall away. It's just that, and I'm going back to what Pastor said, I think that there is a lack of relevance for the people who are coming, because they're no longer, they realize that entertainment will not take them through the storm.
Yeah, we call it, I call it pop spirituality, you know.
That's a good word.
Right.
Good word.
Yeah, pop spirituality. It's very palatable. Yeah.
It's just an observation really quick, Dr. Lands, when you were saying, you know, it's kind of built on sand, it's going to kind of, it will crumble. And Reverend DeSasso, you were kind of referring to it as kind of, how did you say it? Pop?
Yeah, pop spirituality, you know.
Pop spirituality.
It's you know, at times it feels like, you know, an extension of this health and wholeness, wellness movement. You see, you know, it's another branch on that tree.
So can I interpret from kind of the statements that both of you have said that in a way that's sort of an individualistic perspective, if I'm making sense here? In other words, what is it doing for, Dr. Lange, you referred to it kind of like entertainment. What's it doing for the consumer of that entertainment, if you will, rather than what are we doing for those that we're called, if you will, to serve? Is that?
Well, I think the answer is in the question. The body of Christ was never about what I can get out of it. It was always about what I can give. How can I be used in the overall scheme of what God wants done? And we've converted that to more of a consumer mindset, and that is we're coming to get something as opposed to coming to give something. Jesus even said, look, I didn't come here to be served. I came to serve. And so if we're going to work with the principles that he's laid down, then we have to take off that jacket that says, I came to get, and put on the jacket that says, I've come to give.
Yeah. Thank you. This next question, I'll just ask, how would either one of you respond to the statement, Black Lives Matter is a racist organization?
I don't even, I really don't even want to qualify that question with any, with my response, qualify that question with my response. It's, yeah, I've been defensive about it at times, but I think it has not served me very well to try to do to defend what is a movement, a very grassroots movement that's hyper local, and in which leadership is dispersed as widely as it can. I mean, can anybody name the founder even of the Black Lives Matter, or when it was founded, or, you know? No, it's purposefully local, and I don't even, yeah, I can't, I don't understand the question, how it could be racist. So.
I have nothing to add to that. I too feel that when you talk about Black Lives Matter, the only thing worse than talking Black Lives Matter is when you start to say all lives matter, because now what you're doing is you're discounting what someone thought was important about their survival. But I do believe that I was in my first march in '61. And I remember that we marched down, this was in Louisiana, and we marched down between two rows of state police who had shotguns. Some had dogs, German Shepherd dogs, and we were to say nothing. We were to go, kneel, pray, and ask God to deliver the whole city and the state, and then to march out without ever looking up at those individuals who were looking for a reason. But we were then characterized in the newspaper as being rebel rousers and tantamount to being thugs. In '62, we did a sit-in downtown, and it turned violent because the people that were there started to try and throw us out, and we were not yet as non-violently trained, and so we fought back. And of course, we became the people who the law would try and handle and place. Well, we were called once again thugs and rabble rousers. In the '70s, we were in St. Louis doing some things, trying to get a school system outside in one of the little communities to treat all kids as if they can learn and expect high attainment from all, black or white, because we didn't have that many Hispanics in the area at the time. And they said in that particular instance that we were outsiders who were motivated for some type of personal gain. So no matter what the movement is, you're going to always find people who try to characterize it in such a way that it can be to be less than effective in what it is that they said that they were attempting to do. Now, I'm not defending Black Lives Matter. I have some other issues with Black Lives Matter, but keeping it with the question itself, I don't see how you could call it racist. It's no more racist than just being white and being in charge of a bank and redlining the area where people can't get a loan. So anyway, I've said more than I should.
I don't know about that. I think it was quite good to hear. I'm also humbled by being a white man. I'm aware of the fact that people that often raise that point often look a lot like me, that it might be a racist organization.
Yeah, the resistance, the one word that we have not really said here that I think is part of this the agitation that people are experiencing. It's the empire is threatened by movements that cannot be easily taken down. And so when I hear things like Black Lives Matter is racist, what I hear is desperation. Because I came from Ethiopia. I mean, we moved here in the early 1980s. We were running from, an empire that was desperate to eliminate all threats and was determined to do it in a total and complete way. No compromise. If you even looked like you were educated in the West, that Marxist government would kill you and your children and then put your body in the street so that everybody could see what happens if you dissent or if you resist, or even if you look like one day you might resist the expansion of the empire. And what became difficult for the Marxists was to actually, it became harder to identify who the resistors were. And then they just started killing everybody. Next thing you know, the streets were running in blood and people were disappearing and being jailed and tortured and being forced to admit and say something out loud, so that they could be released. So the empire, I believe, what I sense, and from my perspective, I've read about all this before. I've heard this story, and it's and the result was, the crucifixion of Jesus, who resisted the empire and demanded, that the system, the system that was present there in his time and place be dismantled, and was killed for it, murdered. So we have to keep that in mind.
I appreciate the statement. The empire is in jeopardy. I've certainly seen that thought and that fear, if you will, that rooms out there, but I have not been able to put it so eloquently. Well, we are almost at the end of our time, sadly, because I fear that we could, or feel that we could continue talking for quite a while. I would like to invite everyone who is a part of this breakout session that at noon we can return to the I think it's the platform Q grouping, where we will present summaries of all the breakout sessions that have happened today and a closing. Certainly Dr. Lands and Reverend DeSasa, and I don't know if Professor Glover is still with us or not, I don't think so, but certainly, please, you all are absolutely welcome to come. I don't know if you have somewhere else that you need to be, but we welcome you to come to that as well. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in this breakout session. And we look forward to seeing you again at 12 noon, again for the summary of what's happened at each one of our breakout sessions. Dr. Lands, Reverend DeSasa, Professor Glover, thank you for your time and your wisdom and your experience today. I know I am in a better position after hearing and witnessing it.
Thank you, Dr. Simpson. Thank you for the hospitality.
Thank you for the hospitality also.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Pastor, I'm going to make contact with you later.
Do that. Don't get me in any trouble now, don't you know?
But no, wherever I go, there's trouble.
All right.
Thank you all.
Take care.